know folks who can help answer questions that may arise. I've got a presentation here for you tonight that I think provides some context about the project that we proposed. So I'd like to spend a few minutes going through this presentation. And when I'm done with the presentation, we're happy to take questions from you. I believe we had a sign-up list so that we can take votes in order who signed up to ask questions. When we're through that list, we'll have an opportunity to ask more questions, but I would like to make sure that folks do have the opportunity to ask questions. We also have some visual simulations, some updated visual simulations that I'd like to share with you, and we have those. Where are they right now? We're going to put the visual simulations up. We have the poster boards, and because of the way they're prepared, really do need to take a look at the actual posters because they're prepared in a pretty special way. So the presentation will show you a special look at the posters. And all of the materials, the visual simulations and the presentation should be on our website this evening. So you can take a look at them when you get home or tomorrow. So I'd like to get started, and we can go to the first slide, please, Ryan. So just a few basics about the project. It's a 26 megawatt project. That's the amount of capacity that the energy of the solar farm has. The site is actually a collection of 5 parcels, and in total the parcels add up to about 289 acres. We are using about 156 of those acres. So that's the footprint of the project itself, which means that there's about 133 acres left that we'll be preserving. And those 133 acres are forest, wetlands, and other types of open space that will not be touched and will be preserved. We're going to go through construction just a little bit, but I think it's probably best to touch on it here, and some of you may have some questions as well about construction. But in general, a solar project has a relatively simple type of construction. The kind of equipment that you see in solar is very similar to the type of light construction equipment you might see for road construction or small buildings. We don't have to move very much or pick many very heavy things up. We have very little grading that's necessary on this location. Only a few acres of grading will be necessary, and that is one of the benefits of this particular site, that it is a very flat site. So we don't need to move much earth around. We aren't disturbing much soil. There are some areas that topographically we need to smooth out a bit, but it's quite minor overall. The cables are buried. The cables go from the solar panels, the racks themselves, and are collected in a few stations, 14 stations, sprinkled throughout these 5 parcels, all buried underneath the ground. And a cable is also buried from one collection point to the substation that's very close by. So you won't see cables overhead. There are no utility poles throughout these parcels with cables on them. There may be an additional pole of some kind in the substation, but there won't be on the 5 parcels that we're talking about. All the cables are buried. Once we're in operations, solar is a pretty quiet neighbor. There's not that much that happens there during operations. The panels are designed to operate without much human intervention. So there's very little lighting, there's very little noise. The vehicle traffic is very, very light. Once we're in operations, we will have a few pickup trucks that will have to access the site from time to time, and we can get into that in a bit more detail. But in general, you're not going to see heavy construction equipment once the project is in operation, because it's designed to really not require much human intervention. We also don't need any water, and obviously aren't going to be using the school system. So our need for municipal services is quite light. And part of the process, and I'll get into this in a moment, requires us through the state process to put together a plan to decommission the project at the end of its useful life. Brian, please. So this is the project site. These are the 5 parcels in green and red. And I think something to note here that's important, maybe it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. This is all private property. There's no public land involved here. All 5 parcels are owned by private parties. And these parcels are zoned currently. And while much of, or significant parts of the parcel, the 5 parcels are used for farming, or traditionally have, they are not restricted for agricultural use only. So the middle parcel, this large red, is zoned industrial today. And under that industrial zoning, a number of things could be built there. A warehouse facility, a manufacturing plant surrounded by asphalt, and the other facility, the other parcels are zoned R40, which means single-family homes could be built there. By our calculation, something like 100 homes could be built collectively throughout these residential parcels. So I think that's important to note. It's really important to understand that these private parcels are zoned residential and industrial, and there's no requirement that the current owner keep them as farmland forever. So our plan is to build a solar project there. And a solar project, as I said, has a relatively light construction footprint, and this is just a photograph to give you some photos to give you the scale of what we're talking about here. You can see on the top left some construction equipment inserting the foundations, the poles that hold up the racks. Those are the racks that hold the panels. And you can see, I think the most important thing about the photo on the upper right is that the panels are installed by humans. So this is relatively small components that get installed by individual human beings. The panels themselves at their highest point are probably 9 to 10 feet tall. And there are other equipment pads, about 14 of them that'll be sprinkled throughout that 150 plus acres that will have cabinets with some electrical components in them. And those cabinets are probably 10, 12 feet tall. Is that about right, Claude? About 10 feet tall. So much of this work happens with humans using pickup trucks. The only real sort of the biggest thing you would see are a few transportation type vehicles that actually bring all this kit in at the beginning of construction. Our plan would be, should the project be approved, to begin construction sometime in the first half of 2018. And it will take somewhere between 6 and 8 months to install all the equipment. Next slide, please. So how do we pursue? What is our next step? Because of the type of project this is, a renewable energy project, it is subject to state approval process. The body is called the State Siting Council, and we will be making a petition to the State Siting Council. And pursuant to state law, there are standards that the council has to consider, and they will make a determination on whether we meet all the standards that are in state law. Now, before we do that, we will be presenting quite a bit of information to the Siting Council. Our petition will be a relatively lengthy document with lots of supporting materials. We will be making that document available to everyone. It'll be on our website when we file it. I believe it'll also be available in some public locations here in town. Is that right, Aileen? Is that our plan? And that document will describe the project in quite a bit of detail. It will describe all the studies that we have done and allow the Siting Council to look at our analysis and make a determination. Now, there are a number of factors that led us to this particular site, and a number of those factors are, we believe, reasons why the Siting Council will look quite favorably on this project, because we have, in our estimation, gone far above the requirements in state law in putting this proposal together. We are preserving a very significant amount of the existing forest. We're preserving all of the existing wetlands. The project has no impact on the wetlands. We have looked at whether there are sensitive species here who might be impacted and are convinced that there aren't. And we have gone quite a ways in at least attempting to address concerns about what it looks like from different vantage points, and that's something I'll get into a bit more. And part of that plan is to use visual screening. And in some cases, the visual screening is sort of an architecturally chosen fencing that we think looks better than a chain link fence, and visual renderings will show you what that looks like. In other cases, it may be some vegetation. And really what we have done in a number of cases is leave a lot of the existing vegetation that helps to screen the project from particular vantage points like neighborhoods or public rights-of-way. We also plan to retain several of the existing tobacco barns that are on public rights-of-way, and we think those barns, frankly, help to screen the project from a couple of different vantage points. And we have voluntarily pushed the project back from the maximum setback that the town has in their current regs. So in many cases, we far exceed the setback. And when you combine that setback, pushing the project back from the maximum, having screening like fencing and decorative fencing, I would call it, and vegetation, we think that we've addressed many of the visual impacts here. And this is our third public meeting in town. We had one in May. There was one in early June, and we're here today. And I think what we're trying to do here today is show you how we've attempted to address as many of your concerns as we can. And getting to the visual simulations, I think will get us into that. We understand that folks like to look at the fields. We understand that people like the view from their homes of the fields. And so what we're attempting to do is to develop a project and retain as much of that as we can while we develop the project. We're sensitive to that, we understand it, and we've done things that frankly are not required under state law. We've done these things in an attempt to address some of the concerns that we've heard from you. So in addition to those two public meetings, our team here has visited with a number of you individually, some folks several times, in person and by phone. We've done visual simulations from several different vantage points, including a number of private properties where folks have allowed us to come to their homes and done a simulation and worked with them to increase the screening. So we're doing what we can to try to preserve as much as we can while still having a project that we think will be an important clean energy project for the region. Brian? High-level points, benefits to Simsbury. Solar is a really light footprint neighbor. And I can't stress this enough because I know folks get used to the way things look. They get used to the way things are. But this is private property, and it has a particular zoning. And no one can guarantee to you that the owners of that property aren't going to take advantage of the zoning and build what's allowable by law. And the reality is that solar has a far lighter impact than many, if not most, or almost all, of the possible things that could happen here. So none of us has the ability to tell our neighbors what they can and can't do with their property, as long as it complies with the law. So it's all about choices. And much of this, all of these parcels could become either housing or manufacturing. And we've seen it happen in other communities nearby. So we think that solar, compared to those things, has a very, very light footprint. We talked about the very little light, very little noise, very little vehicle traffic. Frankly, less vehicle traffic than you see on a farm. This will be a substantial taxpayer to the town. These 289 acres right now pay a grand total of $25,000 a year in taxes to the town. $25,000. The day this property becomes something other than agricultural, just the land, forget the value of whatever you put on it, but just the land is valued at over $180,000 a year. And then we have to assess the value of the solar farm itself. And we haven't finished that calculation. And that's a matter of, we'll talk to our accountants and talk to the town assessor, but I can guarantee you it'll be at least equal to what the land is assessed at. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. The amount of tax revenue that'll come from these properties will go up by a factor of more than 10. And there are very few other taxpayers that can pay that kind of tax and have this light a footprint. We've talked about the tobacco barns. We've heard from a number of folks that the tobacco barns are valuable to them. They like the way they look, and frankly, from our perspective, they help to screen certain parts of the project and certain parts of the roads. So we're going to retain not all of them, but the two on right off Hoskins. Those are the two in particular that we think we'll retain. And when it comes to agricultural value of the soil, solar farms are really compatible with agricultural use. We are essentially resting this soil. And in addition to resting the soil, like crop rotation, we will, and the details of this will be in our petition that we'll be putting before the Siting Council shortly, we'll be planting some cover crop, the kind of cover crop that we think will increase the nutrient value of that soil. So we think that this soil, as opposed to asphalt in a manufacturing plant, this soil will be far healthier at the end of the day than it otherwise would be. We've talked to a number of folks about things like walking paths, and I think in general we think that's a good idea. And so we're coming up with some plans to put some walking paths through the parcels on the outside of the, not internally of the panels, but outside, so that folks can walk through and enjoy sort of the existing forest and the wetlands and all that. And I know that's a number of folks walk on those parcels today, and we're going to try to do what we can to create a nice little atmosphere that folks can continue to walk throughout these parcels. I think that might, we're going to go to what we've changed. So what I'm going to do next is go through a series of slides. And so there are 2 slides in each set, before and after. And so this is in direct response to comments that we've received from folks at one of the 2 public meetings we've had, or in individual conversations that we've had with members of the public. And so as you look at these, what you're looking at here are solar panels, right? That's a representation of the solar panels. The yellow would be access roads on the parcels that we would need. And the darker lines are property lines. So that's the property boundary. And the other thing you'll see is this line here. That orangey color, that's the area we're focusing in on this set of slides. So when we first met with you all in May, we had some visual renderings and we had some site plans. And this represents this look of the original site plan, this piece of those original plans. So here on Hoskins Road, this is what it looked like previously. And if you can turn the slide, what we've done is we've shifted the panels away. So the panels are no longer in this area. So we've shifted them an additional 100 feet south from the shoulder, which allows us to do a few things. So now we are 150 feet from the property line, when the local zoning or land use reg requires a 50-foot setback. We're now at 100 feet, and we're doing that voluntarily. It also allows us to preserve the woods that you see here on the right. They're also, while it's not called out in that box, the two barns that are directly across the street are the barns that we would intend to preserve. So that's the first one. If you can flip the slide, Brian. So now we're at Berkshire Way. And again, this middle area is the focus. This is what it looked like originally. So the panels came here. And in addition to the panels, these trees were being cleared to this line. You can flip the slide. And we've pushed the panels far back away from, and this is Berkshire, this is the end of Berkshire right there. So we've pushed those panels far away. We've shifted the whole thing 300 feet, which means that we have another 200 feet of wooded buffer, which reduced the total project size by about 4 acres in total. And we did that because, and you can see this from the visual simulations that'll be on the posters here. So one of the visual simulations is a representation from right around here. What it looks like looking through the woods now. And we had similar visual simulations from the last meeting, but you'll see that the new simulation is very, very different. So if you can go to the next. Litchfield Drive. The thing to note here is that originally you see our principal access route, construction access and operational access to the site, was right up here on the yellow. The star is sort of the access from the main road, and the yellow would be our principal access for vehicle traffic. And we did hear from some folks that they were concerned about the amount of vehicle traffic that would be on that route, because it was, under our original plan, the only way in and out of the site for major, for trucks and things like that. Next slide, please. And so what we've done is come up with a second access site over near the barns. Near the barns on Hoskins. So that turn-off area where you can get right off onto where the barns are. So that will allow us to essentially spread the vehicles out. So no increase in number of vehicles, we just get to spread them out, so they're not only going up, they're not all going to that northern route there. Next. If you could go back one. Yeah, so they're here. Here, these are the parcels. So the solar panels are here. Okay, let me go. I'm sorry. I would like to get through all the slides first so we can go back and ask questions. So let me just finish. Could you go to the next one? So here we are on Howard Street, which is up here. So there's the end of Howard, top of the map. And right here, under the original proposal, solar panels were all throughout here, right? This is a hill. Howard is up there. This is a hill that at the end of Howard, you look up that hill, it's very wooded right now. This was all proposed under our original proposal for panels. If you can switch. Next slide, please, Brian. We've just taken the panels out of that area completely. That one has particular relevance because that was a hill, or is a hill. The panels, obviously, on a hill would have been more visible than in some other areas. So we decided to take to move the panels out of that area. That's a loss of about 5 acres or so. I don't know how many. I think we've got one more. Oh, a couple more. Knollwood. Here's Knollwood. Panels are here. And the proposal originally, you can see that outlined area right here, was to clear these trees. And the reason that you need to clear trees in many cases, even if you're not putting panels on the parcel, is that you need a setback of a certain amount of feet around the panels so the sun can actually hit the panels and trees aren't blocking the sun. So in this case, our original proposal was to clear those trees, which are right near Knowlbrook. And if you could flip the slide. So what we've done is we've moved back another 50 feet so that we can retain those trees. Next. Knollwood, again, let me see, where are we here? Knollwood is up here. Right, up here. Originally we had panels in this location, so folks who were on Knollwood right here, panels were pretty close. And here's the outline area and obviously some trees that would have need to have been cleared. Next slide, please. So we've pushed that back another 50 feet, reduces the project again, and we retain some of the trees that are there. Again, all of these changes will, you'll be able to see what these changes look like on the visual simulations that we have in the room that are on the posters that you'll all be able to look at them, and they'll all be on our website tonight. So I'm going through the change to explain to you the change we've made, and the visual simulations will allow you to judge what the impact of that change is. And in our view, in many cases, these changes reduce the visibility of the project pretty significantly. Is that the last one, Aileen? Dorset Crossing. So here's Dorset Crossing. You can see the big outline, which also, right here, originally panels and clearing of trees. Next slide. And we pushed the panels away so that we can retain the trees in that area, which will reduce the impact from that northeastern site. So we've got a buffer about 100 feet there. I think that's it for the slides. So I'm going to ask, so we're going to go to questions, and we've got a sign-up list. So Lee Hoffman, our counsel, has the list, and he's going to start going through it. If you're not on the list, I'll get you eventually, but we're going to go through the list first.
So I'll let folks come up. So for those of you who signed up in the back and checked off that you want to speak, I'm going to call out the names of the individuals who checked on the box that they want to speak. And I'll be like Phil Donahue and walk the mic up to you. So I know that it's crowded, bear with me. If you didn't check the box, but you've got a question after hearing the presentation, or you didn't get a chance to sign in, don't worry. We're just giving preference to the folks who checked the box first, and then after that, we will get to everybody, I promise. So, and if I mispronounce your name, I apologize in advance. I think the first one I'm going to get right because it's Brad Meade. Mr. Meade, I don't know where you are, but oh, you're dead center. Very good. My cardiologist will be thrilled.
Thank you. I'm Brad Meade. I live at 73 East Weetock Street. My concern with this is the process. I understand that as a developer, you're only beholden to the state siting board. I've served on land use commissions for 25 years, and we have very carefully in this town created a community that allows developers to come through a process, and we as the representatives of the community determine what's right or what's not right for the community. You're bypassing that process because the law allows you to do that, although you are holding these meetings, and I appreciate that you're doing that. You don't even have to do that, apparently. I was not aware of the state's right for eminent domain until just recently, and I suspect that's true for most folks. So my question to you is, would you be willing to submit your project through the land use boards the way somebody might normally come through, so that the town and its community can be represented? You don't have to do that, I realize that. But if you're not willing to do that, you're not willing to be part of the community planning process, then all of this is just window dressing. So my question is, are you willing to submit through the normal land use programs? I don't think the project would fly. And if it doesn't, then all you represent is an invasion of our community along with the state. So I'm interested in whether, and if either through that process or a referendum process you discovered that the town did not want your project, would you be willing to withdraw the application? It's my understanding that as of July 1st, any project submitted after that is not going to be, this project would not be allowed because the state has changed its law, but it only becomes effective July 1st, and I assume your application is going to beat the clock. So now the state doesn't want it, the community may not want it, I don't know, maybe people here would vote for it. But if you bypass the state and bypass the community, then you're just an invader.
Well, so, well, thank you, Mr. Meade. Let me address that a few ways. I thank you for acknowledging that we're doing a number of meetings that, frankly, are not required by any law or regulation. And we're doing all this voluntarily. Every meeting we've had publicly, every meeting we've had with a citizen, all of the changes that we've made, all of the additional buffer setbacks, all of those things we've done voluntarily because we want to do as much as we can for the project to fit into the community. Many developers would not do that. Many developers would drop the petition on the siting council without much of a word to anyone other than the requirement to give notice to the town. And we did not do that. We have delayed our application for quite some time now so that we can play through these public meetings. I don't know if you're a property owner, sir, in this town, but most property owners don't voluntarily submit themselves to rules and regulations in public referendums if they don't need to. But we're going through an additional process. Again, this is private property, and the land is zoned industrial and residential. And you mentioned the town's planning process, but the town actually went through a planning process, and there's a town economic and conservation plan. And much of this land in the town's plan is for industrial in the Hoskins Road area. So the town, frankly, sir, has spoken at least through the town's planning process. So we believe we're going well above and beyond what's required by law. And if I was just hanging my hat on what the regs were, we wouldn't be here tonight and I wouldn't have made all those changes. So I'm happy to take more suggestions for changes. There's more of a public process that's coming along through the siting council where folks can weigh in again. And we're going to continue to try to improve the project so more and more folks are supportive of it. But what I can't do is try to step on the toes of the state siting council when there is a state process and state rules and regs, and I have to follow that process. But I'm going to go above and beyond and try to meet with as many folks as I can and address as many issues as I can, because I understand that people want to look at fields, even if they don't own that land. They want the land to stay the way it is, and I want to address as many concerns as I can. And I think we're doing the best we can, but we do want to build a solar farm.
So the next person is Linda Schofield? Schofield?
Thank you. At the risk of having my head chopped off, I want to actually express some support. When I moved to when I moved to town, my house was surrounded by woods, but it was private property, and I now have neighbors on those sides, and I have stereophonic barking dogs. I have swimming pools complete with screaming teenagers and loud radios. I have a basketball court that's bouncing all the time. So, being a very noise-sensitive person, I personally would love to have solar panels on either side of me because it would be a lot quieter. I do want to hear what people's concerns are about the project, because this is the first meeting that I've come to. But generally, I'm a very strong supporter of green energy. I think we have to go there. I've seen what coal-fired plants look like. I've seen what, petroleum burning plants look like. I've seen all kinds of other stuff. And actually just coming back from a trip out west where there were tons of solar farms and wind farms, I thought they were pretty cool. And I think if we want to see our country go to more energy independence and to a greener energy set of generating plants, then we have to start supporting these things. To me, no traffic, no noise, no pesticides from agriculture, no polluting emissions, and we get tax money. I'm on the Board of Finance, so this is something I care about. I wish this many people came to our Board of Finance meetings. I think it's, I'm generally supportive, so thank you. Oh, I do have one quick question. What's
Yes.
actually being grown there? I mean, it's been said that it's agricultural land, but I go by these fields and it looks mostly I'm not sure exactly which fields they are, but most of the fields I see are weeds, not actually farmed. So.
I'm not sure if these microphones are, I guess,
Yep,
can you hear me? It's a combination of crops. It rotates. So right now there's corn and some squash. In the fall they'll plant different crops. I think last fall there were those little ornamental squashes that you put out at Halloween. But it varies. It's probably dependent on what agricultural crops are getting subsidized by the government.
The next folks who asked to speak are Marc and Sue Silverman. Oh, outstanding.
My name is Marc Silverman. I've been a resident of Simsbury for the past 35 years. My wife, Sue, likewise. And I have two questions. One, as a resident of the town, but also as an atomic and nuclear physicist, I'm puzzled. Why are you here? Why are you in Simsbury? The federal government and the state of Connecticut recommends, which supports solar energy strongly, as do I, under the appropriate circumstances, advocate that you avoid not just forest and wetland, as you had in your slide, but wooded areas and farmland, which, if one is going to avoid that, Simsbury is not exactly the place that you would want to put a solar energy generating facility. Secondly, for following that point, if one looks at the numbers carefully, as I tried to do, a typical silicon photovoltaic panel is about a meter wide and 1.6 meters high. You could calculate what the area is, generates about 250 watts, and you want to generate something like 26 megawatts. You could do the calculation relatively straightforwardly and come to the conclusion that actually the land use that you need is about 40 or fewer acres. Yet you are taking up 170 acres in parcels that can run up to 300 acres. Why do you need so much land if all you could get by to is about 40 acres? The government, ours and the federal government as well, sort of say, try blighted lands, try brownfields, try landfills, try rooftops. There are all kinds of areas throughout Connecticut where you could put your establishment and have adequate surface area to generate 46,000 megawatt hours per year with 26 megawatt production rate without taking up farmland, whether the land is private or not. So my two questions are, why Simsbury and why so much land?
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Silverman. Well, the parcels that we have here, the 5 parcels, frankly, are ideally suited for solar. They're flat. They're principally cleared. They're very easy to construct on because they were farmland. We know that there aren't boulders, there aren't lots of rocks. They're cleared. We don't have to clear too many trees. We get to leave most of the trees there. And we know that there aren't many species that could be impacted. We know that we don't have to impact wetlands. And very importantly, we're very close to a very large transmission line. There's a 115 kilovolt line that runs through town right now that passes through a substation that's very close by Dorset Crossing. In the proximity of that scale of flat, cleared land to a large transmission system makes this an ideal solar site in general. So we intend to use So the physical sort of perimeter of the site takes up a little over 150 of the 290 or so, 289 acres. And that sizing is, I think if you look at actually built solar projects across the country, particularly this part of the country, you'll see that we're using a pretty standard amount of acres for the amount of megawatts that we are installing. Remember, it's not necessarily the theoretical amount of acreage you need. You need setbacks, you need access roads, you need spacing between panels, you need all of these things that take up more space at the end of the day when you're building an actual project. But why Simsbury? We did look in many other places, and in general looked for locations like this one that were large and flat and near transmission. And then at the end of the day, it comes down to a commercial conversation with a property owner. You need a willing property owner who's willing to say, okay, I'm willing to go forward.
Next person who signed up was Stephen Milski. Pardon my reach.
Thank you. Fortunately, thanks to someone else's question, I don't need to worry about my head being cut off. I'd like to thank you and commend you for your commitment to green energy. I honestly believe that green energy is the way forward, and I'm deeply concerned about over-reliance on fossil fuels. My big question, though, is I feel like there is one of the biggest hindrances to this project is that there are some half-truths that haven't quite been debunked yet, particularly ones including that that this project will increase forest fires, that they increase the cancer rate, and I know that those are largely half-truths, but do you have any plan to debunk any of the more pseudoscience myths behind the project?
Well, I do my best to try to not repeat what I think are myths to begin with. So if any of them come up tonight, I'll be happy to debunk them. There are a number of resources that are publicly available that address things that I think are easily addressed. So I'm not going to start listing what I think are sort of crazy myths. But if they come up tonight, you can rest assured that I will address them. Thank you. I'm sorry, what came up?
Forest fires.
So the first one was forest fires. What was the second one? Cancer. So EMF. Very good. So we'll go through the first one, and our health and safety expert, Cody, is here. He can address both of those.
Yeah, thank you. With respect to fire and fire hazard, there's, in essence, an emergency action plan associated with these facilities, and specifically to minimize risk of fires, particularly in the dry season, is a vegetation management plan. Part of the vegetation management plan, quite honestly, is to remove fuel. So, in essence, you end up about twice a year removing the vegetation, cutting it down, in essence, and trimming it down. I've had conversations with local fire department, and it meets their standards. It's consistent with the industry standards, and it's actually a good fire management plan. You also don't leave debris on the site. You don't make it cluttered with burnable objects such as pallets, those sorts of things. Additionally, if you look at the road system associated with the project, you're going to see it not only does the perimeter, but it transects the site in a number of ways, and it's all a gravel-based road, which is not only to support the vehicles that will be traveling on it, but that also serves as a fire break. The facility also has a security fence all the way around it because it's a high-voltage facility that also limits access for purposes of trespass, vandalism. So from a fire safety standpoint, the facility is compliant with NFPA and all the appropriate standards, and in essence, we have conversations and work that out with the local fire department. To the second question, where people were talking about cancer rates or whatever, I assume that's an EMF question. So with electromagnetic force, those issues came up as a potential risk out of the Scandinavian studies perhaps 20 years ago now. If you follow some of the literature forward, there's been a number of studies that have been peer-reviewed out of Massachusetts, one out of Ontario with the Ontario Health Ministry, I believe, and also, probably more importantly, the Center for Disease Control. In the peer review studies, they pretty much have indicated that the risks associated with electromagnetic force from transmission lines, let alone small-scale generating facilities, is, in essence, extremely small. Even if one were to have the conversation, is it real, is it an incremental risk, it doesn't rise to a level where people think that it is. But even if one were to believe so, two things I would put forth for you to think about. One is EMF forces are only associated with AC current. Solar farms are DC current. The AC portion of the facility is only from the approximate 15 inverters to the transmission lines. Also, to the extent that it's a risk, the mitigation measure is not to have overhead lines and to bury them. So without even debating the first premise, if the corrective measure is to bury them, to remove what risk may or may not exist, this facility proposes that all of the transmission lines all the way into the substation are buried. So therefore, from a risk standpoint, I guess we're to refer to it as a relative risk. There's far more risk associated with the overhead high voltage transmission line through the community and the street lines that power everybody's homes than there is with a facility such as this.
The next person who signed up is Chris Plummer.
My name's Chris Plummer. I live in Granby, just to the north of the site, so I'm not quite a butter. I have two questions. One of them is whether all the environmental issues have been assessed and addressed. In other words, has the site been LEP verified as being remediated according to state standards? And the second question deals with the electrical, I'll call it quantity and quality, that I can expect at my home. Because 30 years ago, before that substation, it was a problem. It's gotten much better, and I'm grateful. But my questions are, what will be the effect of the project on things like voltage and frequency to my home? On a more micro scale, how will it affect the sinusoidal wave pattern, noise, and all those things that drive our digital gadgets at home crazy? And the third is, how about reliability? You're going to be switching on and off 26 megawatts day and night, and with clouds and other things. And we're also going to have times when the grid goes down. So can you back me up when the grid goes down, like 5 years ago when we had no power for 11 days? Thank you.
All right, there were a couple questions in there. Why don't we start with the environmental review? And so for the environment, I'm going to ask, who wants to take it? So Sue Moberg will take that, and maybe you can just describe the reviews that we have to go through here.
Sure. So for this project, Deepwater hired a consultant that performs these sorts of studies. It's called the Phase 1 Environmental Site Assessment. And so what that is it's a planning level screening of site conditions, both with respect to ongoing activities and historic activities on the site itself and in areas near the site. The purpose of doing one of these studies is essentially it supports a real estate transaction. So you, as the buyer, can find out if there's a reason to be concerned with buying the property. So on the basis of the results of this Phase 1 environmental site assessment, DWW Solar has opted to go ahead with this project. So they are comfortable with the environmental conditions on the property to, at this point, take ownership and any potential liability associated with that.
I think the second, or do you have a follow-up on that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Because the study that was done so far is voluntary and nothing that was identified in the assessment prompted the need to do any further testing. There's no need for us to proceed any further with an LEP, make any filings with the state, or anything of that sort. Essentially, there's no ongoing requirements or compliance activities that MWh Solar or the current property owner needs to do.
I think the second question was around reliability. I think the best way to address that is that our project will be interconnected with the local transmission system at that substation that's right near Dorset Crossing. Before we can connect our project into that substation, we will negotiate an interconnection agreement with the local utility. Part of that process, frankly, the principal part of that agreement, is for the utility to tell us what we need to do to protect their existing system. And so that is essentially an engineering exercise that our engineers and the utilities engineers will go through that interconnection process. And they will put some standards forward that we'll have to meet. We'll have to do some studies together with them to demonstrate that the project meets all of the reliability standards of their system. As you can imagine, no utility wants a project that interconnects with them to affect their current system, because they're the ones that get blamed. So they're very cautious about that. And so that's a process that will happen as the project proceeds. Those reliability questions will be front and center. I would say in general, this is a relatively small project for the kind of system that's electric system that's already coming through town. You have a pretty large transmission line that's running right now through the town, that 115 kV line. So I would not anticipate any reliability issues. That's one of the reasons why we chose this site, because it is a relatively easy interconnection, so we're confident that we'll be able to meet the utility's reliability standards. Lee?
The next person who signed up was Joe Pizzuto. I'll come to you, sir. I'll come to you.
Hello, folks. Joe Pizzato here from County Road. Came to this town in '49. I don't want to keep kicking a dead horse, but I came here in '49. We moved to Simsbury from Hartford. It was nothing but farm, tobacco, and farm, from the Avon line right up to the Granby line. I've watched this town. People came to this town because it was lovely, because it was farmland. Now it's all disappearing. We got 34, 35 square miles of property in Simsbury. Why can't we just keep 200 acres of history? Martin Luther King worked right on that property. I'm sure Deepwater is well rehearsed tonight to answer every question that comes at him. It's just that I don't want it. There's a group here in town that don't want it. I think it's going to take away from Simsbury. And what appalls me most is Massachusetts, Rhode Island can come to Connecticut and say what we got to do. This is not Russia. They just want to come here and tell us what to do. And I'm surprised. And I hope Simsbury can somehow get up the legal activity to fight this thing, because we love this town. We want to keep it nice. Let the youth come up and see a little farm instead of this electronic jungle that you guys want to put in. We're going to be shamed. Thank you.
I don't feel any particular need to answer the question. I think you know my position. If you had a question, I'd answer it, but I'm not going to repeat myself.
Okay, the next person who signed up to speak is Bill Traynor. Well, okay.
You're obligated to ask a question. You must.
Bill Traynor, Berkshire Way. My question is simply, you just went over the wiring and the EMFs and what have you.
Yes.
But what about the panels themselves? What happens in 20 years? How are you going to dispose of them?
Mr. Cody will address that issue. Go ahead, Claude.
Basically, panels in many states actually lots of states in the Northeast in particular are looking into it. The Solid Waste Association of Government Regulators has recently reviewed it, and as a general statement, it's anticipated that panels will be considered an e-waste in the very near future. So therefore, in some states they already are, such as New Jersey, but in the Northeast it's generally believed that they will be an e-waste, so therefore they'll be subject to the e-waste regulations, such as the universal waste regulations.
If
I'm
I
saying-
could, Claude, if, just explain what an e-waste is, but then there are.
Okay, sorry. E-waste and the e-waste regulations are associated with electrical equipment. So, for example, many states have banned electrical components from landfills, which is why you can't take your iPad, your computer, or your television set, a stereo, etc., and put it in the general trash, and that has to go in a special waste stream that goes to electronic recycling. Currently, panels are not listed as e-waste in many states. They are listed as e-waste in some states, I know for sure in New Jersey. Most of the Northeast states have not listed them as e-waste currently, but most of the states are also, on a reciprocal basis, planning to put them in it. This project has approximately a 20 to 25-year life, so at the end of a 25-year life cycle, I would be shocked if these panels won't be treated as e-waste, and I would expect that to happen in the next few years.
And to put a finer point on it, as part of the Siting Council approval process, one of the things that the project has to submit is something called a decommissioning plan, which not only plans for how the panels and all of the attendant equipment, the racking, etc., is removed from the site, but also has to provide some mechanism for financial assurance. So even if these developers are not here in 20 to 25 years, because granted that's a long period of time, the Siting Council ensures that there's a financial mechanism, whether it's through bonding or some other means, so that there are funds set aside to make sure that the panels and racking and all the other equipment is removed at the end of its natural useful life. So that's the second way that Connecticut makes sure that that gets taken care of. The next person who checked the box is Joe Tracy. Okay.
Good evening. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us tonight, even though I know it's not required. I'm Joe Tracy. I live on 40 Berkshire Way, about 3 houses down from the property line. The question I have is, the state legislature has recently spoken with Senate Bill 943, which requires that you look, not just you, all developers of these types of projects, look at brownfields, industrial sites, state property, highway right-of-ways before they look at agricultural or forest land. And I understand that the law is not a law yet because the governor hasn't signed it, and it'll go into effect 7/1. And so I understand you're going to file your petition with the Siting Council next week, so you'll be under the wire. That's great. We appreciate that, I'm sure. The question I have is, why do we need a project of this size essentially in a residential neighborhood? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tracy. You're right. We do anticipate filing our petition with the Siting Council next week. That's why we're here tonight, and we'll make that filing publicly available. There is a process that folks can go through to make their comments known to the council as well. I think I've talked about this a couple times about why. It is a very good site for solar, and I'm not going to convince you of that, sir. But I can tell you from a solar development perspective, it's a very good site for solar. And I would remind you, because it really is important, that most of the time we don't get to tell our neighbors what they can and can't do to their property. Most of the time. If they're in compliance with the law, we can't dictate what color their house is. This property is zoned residential and industrial. A manufacturing plant could be built there as of right. So again, I think it's important to consider this as choices. There are always choices in life. There are alternatives, and as much as we might want things, sir, to stay exactly like they are today forever, that's highly unlikely. So I would ask you to consider what the alternatives here could be. We're not going to build a manufacturing plant. Let me put that on the table. but it's allowable, and so is a solar project. And so what we're trying to do is address as many concerns as we can. These meetings are not required. The setbacks that we did are not required. Visiting with individuals to do visual simulations from their homes, they're not required. More screening is not required. More vegetation is not required. A different kind of fence is not required. None of those things are required. So what we're trying to do is use the land in a way that we're entitled to use it, while trying to be as sensitive to folks as possible. We understand that people like the way the fields look. And I know that at heart that's most of the concern from many people. They like to look at the fields, and they like the feel and look of it. And I get that. We understand that. But many of these agricultural fields are being developed for lots of different things right now, including in this part of Connecticut. It's happened already. You've seen it in other places. And we think solar is a really good neighbor. Solar is a very, very good neighbor. It's quiet. It's not a lot of light. It's not a lot of traffic. We pay taxes, and really nothing happens there. So when you're weighing the choices about what could happen to that property, I think it's a false choice if you think that the land just stays the way it is forever. Again, sir, you're probably welcome to put in a bid for that land with the property owners, and then you can keep it as fields forever. But it's a false choice to say just leave it the way it is, because it's very likely that something else will happen.
The next person who signed up is Mike Green. Okay. In that case, Carol and Ed Roble. No more. Okay. Wow, we're really speeding through the lightning round here. Martha Drapo. Do I have that right? Well, Mrs. Nigro was nice enough to check for you, so.
You are not going to be removing as much forest now, and if I'm correct, remembering right. It was going to be about 50 acres you were going to remove, and I'm wondering how much it is now.
I believe we've gone from a clearing of 50 to a clearing of 35.
Okay.
So I think what's remaining between forest, what will remain between forest and wetlands is about 130 acres? Is that right? 133 acres of forest and wetlands will remain.
Okay.
Most of that is forest.
Okay, my second question is, we're right. This is pretty close to an airport. Is there any concern about reflection from these panels interfering with flights?
Sure, I can answer that. One of the requirements that the Siting Council places on our project is that we consult with the Federal Aviation Administration. So we did that already. Back in March, we made our filing. It's called a Notice of Construction or Alteration. FAA responded back to us in April with a determination of no effect. So information that we submit as part of that application includes the latitude and longitude of the perimeter of the facility and its elevation. And we also provided some information regarding the panels and the amount of reflectance, which is low, probably lower than most people might think. It's 8%, which is fairly low. So if you think about it, the more light that's reflected, the less efficient the panel is. It's not generating electricity, so it really makes sense when you understand that. So it's fairly low reflectance.
The next folks who signed up are Peggy and John Schuler. Bless you, sir. Okay. That's fine. I'm going to go with Schwager. Is it Jen or John Schwager? Well, Mrs. Nigro checked a couple of boxes. I assume she talked to you all ahead of time. Mary Weena. No longer here. Okay. Steve Rowley. Excuse me. Sir.
To irritate most people, I'm not really in favor of the project. However, at the same time, I appreciate what you guys are doing. But I think my irritation is with the state of Connecticut, the laws, and what the 3 states did, and just how they, eminent domain, that they're just bypassing what the town can do. So, not a real question. I did not check, but I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Fair enough. Okay. Based on my notes, I believe that everybody who checked the box to ask to speak has spoken. If I've got that wrong, I apologize in advance. But as we said from the outset, just because you checked the box, pardon me? Honestly, you didn't check the box, ma'am. So, but I am not surprised that you want to ask a question. So, what I was going to say is, anybody wants to ask a question at this stage of the game, I will come and walk to you, I promise. But since you raised your hand first, you get first crack.
Thank you. So I think the RFP states that you will have a solar project that is greater than the minimum 20 megawatts. And I believe the RFP states that those will be sold outside of the RFP. So speaking to Mr. Silverman's point, you should have excess energy that's generated from this facility. And where you're saying that you won't submit to public regulations, similar to anybody else, they wouldn't submit to additional public regulations like was suggested going through the town process for transparency. So one of the questions I have is, at the Siting Council, will you be willing to allow in evidence such as the impact that it has on the agricultural land and not object to it, even though it's not technically within the Siting Council's purview? And also, when you talk about the project fitting into the community or wanting the desire for it to fit in the community, my question is, have you taken a look at the plan of conservation and development for the town and recognized that it in fact takes great value in its open spaces and its farmland, and how that your project is impacting that, your thoughts on that, and whether or not we can have your environmental impact study, and when that might be available for us to take a look at.
Okay, so there are several questions there. I'm going to try to remember them. I'm sure you will correct me if I jumble them. There was a question about process at the Siting Council, and I'm not going to answer legal questions about process. I'm going to defer to Mr. Hoffman on that.
It's because secretly you hate me. So a couple of things about the Siting Council process. Part of the problem, and your town attorney can confirm this, you don't have to take my word for it, but the state of Connecticut law is very clear that the Siting Council has primary jurisdiction over all of these types of facilities. The term is facility, that generate electricity. In this particular case, it's a facility that generates between 1 megawatt and 65 megawatts, which is the process that we're going through. Because the State Siting Council has the sole jurisdiction, even if we were willing to submit to town boards and other such things as Mr. Meade was suggesting, frankly, it would be nothing more than a public meeting such as this one because of the way the state statute is written. That's not a Deepwater wind issue, that is a State Siting Council issue. As for what goes on in the State Siting Council process, it is my understanding that your town is going to request a public hearing from the State Siting Council, as is its right. The town will be a party to any siting council proceeding by statute. The siting council will come to Simsbury at some point during the process, well before any approval or denial, and the siting council will tour the site, and I am operating under the assumption that the town is going to ask for a public hearing, and I am operating under the assumption that that public hearing request will be granted. We are certainly not going to oppose a public hearing. We are happy to have another public forum. That forum will likely, I can't speak for the siting council, but past experience would indicate that the public hearing will be in Simsbury. My request to the siting council will be that it be in a room with air conditioning. I brought the two sides together. That all having been said, that is the siting council process. Mrs. Nigro, to your point about agriculture, although not required by statute, if you look at other projects that have involved either former agricultural land or current agricultural land, the siting council has already requested that applicants provide information on impacts to agriculture. And so we are anticipating that they will do so, and we will be providing information related to that. So it's not a question of whether or not we oppose it. We know that those questions will be asked, and we're prepared to answer them. With respect to your town plan of conservation and development, respectfully, I think you and I may agree to disagree on this particular point. If you look at your town plan of conservation and development and you look at the maps that are attached thereto, what you will see is that a significant portion of this property is currently slated under the town plan of conservation and development for economic development, not agricultural development, that is commercial or industrial, including manufacturing plants and warehousing and the like. That is what the town plan of conservation and development says. Moreover, the town plan of conservation and development recognizes 8 farms, including Folly Farm and a couple of other farms, as the agricultural sites that the town wishes to preserve in the agricultural section. This particular farm is not one of those. And so with respect to the town plan of conservation and development, we believe that we're comfortable that this proposed project comports with your town's plan. And I apologize because I know you asked more questions, and I can't for the life of me remember what they are right now.
The last one was about the environmental assessment and when would it be available. So most of the field work has been completed. We're still writing up the findings, doing some more research, but all of the aspects of that environmental assessment will be filed as part of the petition to the siting council. So the petition, provides a narrative description, and then there will be technical exhibits that will support the information presented in the petition.
Okay, I'm going to go up this way because I see a couple of people all clumped together, so I don't have to walk as much. Yes, ma'am. Could you let everyone know who you are?
Yeah, my name's April Pizzato. I live at 16 County Road, and my son lives at 14. Another one lives at 20, and I'm sure I speak for my neighbor John down there who lives at 10. We're right on the corner parcel where you come up Hoskins and it goes to county. So we have the corner goes up and then over. Okay, I have a couple questions. Because of where I live, number one, obviously I don't want it, but that's not why I don't want it. Number one is I want to know who is doing the environmental study. Is it somebody that you hired, or is it somebody independent? And secondly, as far as the wildlife go, I already have animals, coyotes, bear, deer in my yard constantly. They're very happy, and they stay in the fields when it's agriculture. What's going to happen when all those fields are fenced off? Where are all those animals going? They're going to be in all our neighborhoods. They're going to be in our backyards. They're going to eat your plants, your trees. I love the animals, but I think they have a better place out in the field.
So I'm going to see Lee, with respect to the environmental review, can you talk about how the siting council works?
I can. I thought Sue is chomping at the bit to talk about who's doing it, but the answer is we hired a team of experts to do they are outside contractors that Deepwater Wind and the project hired. All of that material then has to be turned over to the Siting Council, and the Siting Council, as the state board, does an independent review of those environmental reports. That includes looking for endangered and threatened species, the environmental site assessment that Ms. Moberg talked about, stormwater runoff prevention. All of those reports are reviewed by the staff engineers at the Connecticut Siting Council, so they are independently reviewed. They had to be prepared by someone, and that we prepared them, and then the state will review them.
So I'll just. So I was just going to add that, so my name is Sue Moberg. I work for a company called Vanasang in Brussels. Our office is in Wethersfield, Connecticut, just south of Hartford. My colleague, Paul Vitaliano, here is also with me. I'm a professional wetland scientist. I've got over 20 years of experience doing assessments just like this. I'm also a professional soil scientist, which is required in the state of Connecticut in order to evaluate wetlands. So my staff have been conducting the environmental assessments into things like rare species, wetlands, wildlife, soil health, things of this nature. And my colleague Paul's staff have been preparing the engineering studies that are required to support the petition to the Siting Council. The other experts that Lee mentioned are heritage consultants, another Connecticut-based firm that specializes in cultural resource surveys. So they've been looking at things like the tobacco barns and examining the site for sensitivity for archaeological materials. You may have seen people out there over the last couple of weeks. That's the heritage heritage consultants folks, and we also have Gordon Perkins here from EDR, which is a company that specializes in doing visual impact assessments. So, there's a host of us. We specialize in this kind of thing, and we've got decades of experience doing environmental assessments of this sort.
I've been promised that there'll be a very brief follow-up.
Okay. This is a new question, though. Being that same corner there on County Road, just off of Hoskins, I know there is no buffer between our property lines and your site, and the road that you're proposing is going to be another one of those major entrances for the construction of that project, runs right along our property lines. John's at 10 County, my son's at 14. There is absolutely no forest between our property lines and the current farm that's there, which was fine when it was a farm, but when you have all that construction in, there's no tree line. The tree line that's there is our trees. There's absolutely no buffer between your project and our property lines.
So we're going to have a number of visual simulations for folks to see after the Q&A portion ends. But I would suggest that you meet with Gordon and with me. I'm Aileen Kenny. I'm responsible for permitting and environmental at Deepwater. So why don't we just meet directly and talk about that specific area, and we can discuss it.
Hi, my name is Bruce Elliott. I live at 21 Lincoln Lane. Speakers was very clear in pointing out that he came to Simsbury in 1949. I came in 1948. I'm sure there's people here longer than that, but I have a very pleasant memory of the early years of Simsbury and the farming, and the pace of life was different, but it's changed, and everybody knows that. It continues to change. I'm not thrilled with it, but it continues to change. Where I live at Lincoln Lane, down at the end of my street, they're in the process of building 300 apartments on a site that was 60 acres of virtually open land, that was farmland, that the current owner has a right to develop the land, and he sold it to a developer. They're putting apartments in there. And our land use process has approved a flurry of apartments in the south end of Simsbury, and in Avon they've approved 300 more. But my concern is this, that you reference the land use regulations in Simsbury and repeatedly point out that this acreage is zoned residential and industrial. The industrial land you offer as illustrations, manufacturing and industrial uses, but you never mention office space. And I would want everyone to be aware, and maybe you are too, and just don't mention it, but professional office space is allowed in industrial. And we had a wonderful community resource in the Hartford Life Insurance Group where they had their headquarters for going on 30 years. That was industrial zone land, and it's professional office. It is no longer. There was a special zone developed for that land. But my point is that just because it's industrial doesn't mean it can't have some other use, and office space is one. I don't know that the neighbors would be more enthusiastic about office space than a solar farm, but there are other uses under those categories that you didn't mention. My other point is that for those who were at the meeting 2 weeks ago, they heard our town planner, Jamie Rabbit, expound at some length in trying to make clear that the current zoning regulations, Simsbury, do not allow solar farms. And we don't want anyone to think that's an oversight. They're not in the regulations because they were not wanted by the people serving on the land use boards over time. Now, that might change in the future, but if your project is approved by the siting councils, it doesn't change the zoning on that land, and it does not change the Simsbury zoning regulations. The siting council maybe, and your project might be successful in getting in there, but the zoning regulations don't permit. And Mr. Rabbit was quite articulate on that point. They don't permit solar farms. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Again, thank you for coming tonight. I know you don't have to, and I appreciate it. My name's Diane Tracy. I live on 40 Berkshire Way. I've been kind of conflicted about this whole thing. On the one hand, I support solar energy. I support wind energy. I've been around the world. We're way behind, and something needs to be done. My husband does not want to sit there and watch the fields. He was discussing the massiveness of the project itself. And I guess I'm really disappointed, and I agree with this gentleman over here with Connecticut, that they've not been on top of this at all. And I think what bothers a lot of people is the idea of the state of Massachusetts choosing the solar farm place where it's going to be located, and a New York City hedge fund backing up a Rhode Island company to build it. There's no Connecticut in there. And to add, this is not your fault. This is absolutely not your fault. This is Connecticut's fault. But one of my other questions, and I asked it at a meeting at Henry James, was where could I see where you had built a solar farm before so we could evaluate the maintenance, the aesthetics, and everything else. I kind of got shuffled over to your gentleman here who told me I could go to Seabury and look at solar panels. That really wasn't what I was asking. But another gentleman did continue and asked you, well, where are you building them? And you mentioned Foster, Rhode Island, and Gloucester, Rhode Island. So I called the town halls, and I called a number of people up there. And to be honest, I'm concerned that you're building the largest solar field in New England, and you've never done this before. You don't have any track record. The two sites that were mentioned in that first meeting, the small town of Foster, which is 4,000 people, gave approval through their town boards to build a 2.4 megawatt field encompassing approximately 8.7 acres. And Foster, their zoning records, every house built has to have a 5-acre lot. And it's, according to them, it's off of the beaten track. And also, according to them, nothing's been started yet. Also in Gloucester, I talked to the fine people there, and their population is around 9,000. You did come through with an application in January of this year, but that was a pre-application. You have not come back with anything since then. And so I'm just really concerned that we have nothing, there's no track record here. We have nothing in terms of maintenance, security, designs, and aesthetics that we can evaluate to make sure that this is going to look right. And Connecticut overall needs to think really carefully about this project. Hopefully it's not a done deal. I feel like it is. But that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
I didn't realize you had a question. Sorry. You made a number of statements there, so I'll try to address them as I recall. You will have an opportunity to see what the plans for the project are when we submit our petition to the Siting Council. So I'm going to try to address a number of comments the lady made, and I'll get to her answer, I assure you, sir, her question. You will see all of the construction methods, plans for operations, plan for emergency response, all of those things will be part of the pretty large submission that we'll make to the council. And we'll make that available online. Again, not something we need to do, but we'll make it available online so it's easy for you folks. It'll also be available in several places here in town. We have several solar projects in development. We have not built a solar project. We have built the first offshore wind farm in the United States, a $300 million project that I can assure you is multitudes far more complex than a solar project. So you can judge whether we're competent to build a solar project or not. We feel we're very competent, and ultimately it'll be up to the Siting Council to determine whether we've met the standards. You're welcome.
Excuse me, I want to see if that's...
Hi, Jim Rogers. I live on Musket Trail at the end that's toward the southernmost allotment. I thank you also for coming, and I think you guys have done a good job. I still am tending toward opposing it, but you made some compelling arguments. But the thing I want to ask is, one thing that I bring to this as I try to decide where I stand is an assumption about what does this mean for the larger picture. I know a number of people have mentioned this. There's a lot of green goodwill about thinking that this will reduce carbon emissions. I would like to, it would be nice if somebody could do the math around that and tell me how much is it really going to matter as far as that goes. And I'll just tell you my basic assumptions. From what I understand, our base power in Connecticut is coming from Millstone, and so that's already emissions free. And then we have peaking facilities that are natural gas, and my guess would be that you're not going to offset the peaking facilities much because that's nighttime energy. But I could be wrong. You can correct me on those basic assumptions, but more broadly, it would be really helpful to quantitate. We've talked about all the environmental risks. Is there an environmental the narrative is that there is an environmental benefit. I'd really like to see some numbers around that. How much of an environmental benefit is there from these types of projects?
So, Mr. Rogers, our petition will include some of that information that you're looking for in terms of environmental impacts, positive and negative. When you think about carbon emissions and carbon reductions, it's important to think about the grid that we have here in New England. It's a regional grid, so all of the power that we consume in New England is produced throughout New England. So even this tri-state solicitation that Connecticut participated in, Connecticut selected projects that will be built in other states, because it is the New England-wide grid that is the relevant question when you think about whether carbon is being increased or reduced. So what solar does, like wind, is it produces at a very low cost on the grid, and it cuts the highest cost plants' usage time down overall throughout the grid. So that generally means the higher carbon intensity uses throughout the region. So in almost every case, in every region's grid, certainly here in the Northeast, solar and wind have enormous carbon reduction impacts. And it's pretty well established. So we're not really displacing the nuclear power. That's running because it's base load and it just runs all the time. But what we do is allow the grid to use those quick start resources like gas and in some cases oil fuel-fired. Gas and fuel-fired, fossil fuel-fired plants have to be used less often because the renewable resource comes online. We almost never take offline nuclear power because it's always running. Yeah.
If you could address the specific point. So, I mean, isn't most of the peaking energy, though, going to happen, most of the peaking needs are going to be once the sun's gone down? Isn't that the case?
Yeah, so generally in the region there are two peaks. There's sort of an evening peak and there's a little morning peak, right? So most of the peak will happen in this region when people come home at night, right? So sometime 5, 6, 7 o'clock, that's when the grid needs the most energy. There's another peak in the morning when people wake up and they power things up. So solar produces most of its power in the middle of the day, but the grid is still using those other resources like natural gas throughout the day. So solar always dispatches. It's always producing power. It dispatches all the time. The grid essentially never tells solar to not produce. So since solar is always producing, the grid operators will tell other plants like natural gas plants, we don't need you so much right now. So now this is not an enormous project. I understand it's big for this community, but in terms of the New England power grid, it's not an enormous project. But collectively, all of these solar projects decrease the use of the fossil, and that has a net carbon benefit throughout the region.
I'm Carol Afrigola from 10 North Drive. I have several statements and questions. This New England power grid decided.
Can you speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry. So this New England power grid thought that taking the two smallest states, Rhode Island and Connecticut, were the first two places that you were going to put solar farms. I'm not sure whose idea that was. You've got Massachusetts. We have a substation right on Route 10 as you're going up to Southwick, like the one that is near Dorset Crossing. It is surrounded by mostly fields, some hills, very few trees, probably farmland. Why that wasn't considered, I don't know. Am I wrong in what you said that the fencing? Am I wrong in saying that the fencing is going to be high voltage? One of the gentlemen said something about high voltage fencing.
The fencing won't be high voltage. The facility inside is considered to be a high voltage facility, but the fencing itself will not be high voltage. There will be no risk with the fence.
The fencing is not electrified.
There is no
electric fence. Yeah.
There is such a thing. All right.
Yes,
so
but
it is not.
This is not. Yes.
You talking about renderings and so forth, and renderings, and I agree with Ms. Tracy that renderings don't really show you what it looks like. You don't have any that are up and running close by or probably at all. And so to see pretty pictures of trees and so forth all around it and fencing that looks very architectural and so forth, it's really a picture. It's not a photograph. It's not an exact idea of what it's going to look like. When you talk about putting shrubbery and so forth around, are you going to put, mature plants, or are we going to put little arborvitae that in 20 years will be large plants? So I have that question about that.
Okay. You had I think your first question was around, you mentioned some other locations that were possible. We looked at many locations, and I think that what you have to understand is that this is a solar project is a private business, and in order to build a project, we have to find a willing landowner who wants to do business with us. We can't simply find that parcel that you saw and compel the owner to let us put a solar farm there. So while you may see lots of places that might look good for solar, in most cases, those aren't so great because the landowner doesn't want to sell or the transmission isn't close. So we go through a quite extensive process to look for places that would be good, number one. And I talked a little bit earlier about what we consider a good prospect for a solar location. A big parcel, flat land, mostly cleared, and near a transmission line. And then what we do is we have to see if a landowner is willing to allow this to occur. And that doesn't always happen, as you can imagine. So it is it is a process that we go through to find both good conditions and a landowner who's willing to allow a project to proceed on their property. So we do look at lots of locations. But at the end of the day, this is not some planning process where the government says the project must go here. We're just a private company looking for a good location for a solar farm and trying to get a landowner who's willing to work with us. There was, I spoke so long that I forgot about the second question. Vegetation. Sue can handle the vegetation.
Gordon Perkins from EDR will answer that.
So with regard to the renderings, you mentioned that, it's just a pretty picture of the project or, a drawing of the project. And what I want to stress there is that we do actually come out and photograph the site, and we have a very well-established scientific process for establishing exactly what the proposal is and how it fits into those photographs. So they're put in 2 scales. So what you see in those photographs, if you came back and photographed the built proposal, it will look just like our renderings. So we do put a lot of effort into making sure that what we're showing you is an accurate representation of the project.
And maybe just one follow-up point there. The point of the renderings isn't to show you, a close-up view of the solar farm. We want to show you what it would look like from particular vantage points. So obviously there are other places, if you came inside our property line, where you would see it. But the whole point of the visual rendering is to give you the most accurate possible rendering of what it would look like from a particular place, mostly public rights-of-ways, or in some places, some individual homes. And so that is what it will look like.
Hello, I'm John Eckel. I moved to Simsbury in 1977, 40 years ago, for 2 reasons. One, it's a beautiful community, and it has a great school system. Our children now are grown. All that's left for me now in Simsbury, it's a beautiful community. And I hope we can keep it that way. Everyone supports, I think, probably everyone in this room really supports green energy, renewable energy sources. But I think we got to think beyond the ideal. I go to Vermont quite frequently. The beautiful Green Mountain State is now being rendered less beautiful by solar panels along the highways. It's more of a blight. Also, my understanding of the solar industry is that the costs are coming down, not quite like Moore's Law, but solar panels are becoming more and more efficient. 5 years, 10 years from now, we're going to be producing the same amount of power with a lot fewer solar panels. So if we wait, the plot could be smaller. But there are a couple of other things going on in the background. One is the tax credits that are being given by our federal government in terms of investment tax credit, and I would appreciate it if you could address what the overall investment is and what the overall impact of your investment tax credit is. So you say you are just like any other neighbor, but in fact, we're paying out of our pocket in one way or another to have you here through an investment tax credit. Also, could you address what the regulatory issues are regarding your ability to sell power to the grid, regardless of whether or not they want it? And the reason I raise that as a question, just earlier this week, I saw a news release from the island of Maui, Hawaii, where they have wind power, and the actual cost to the residents in this month of June 2017 went up an average of $15. Well, why did it go up an average of $15? Because they had strong winds this month, and in fact, the power company was required to buy the power at something like 19 cents per kilowatt hour compared to the 13 cents it was costing them to produce it locally. In addition to some of those other things that are happening, I understand that we have a power line that's proposed to come down from Canada, and it'll be run, the electrical will be generated by hydroelectric, which has got basically no footprint at all. My understanding is Elon Musk has suggested that at some point in time in the not too distant future, we'll be able to, because of all these efficiencies, we'll be able to generate a lot of power just in the small corner of the western U.S. without these grids here in Connecticut. So my questions really go back to the financial incentives that you have. You say you are just like any other neighbor, but I think there are some things that are, from a regulatory standpoint, that make you very unique, very different, and can affect us, and we're paying for it in more than one way. And I would suggest that I agree with Mr. Meade, who was the first speaker, and that we really do need a public referendum. You know, we have people who are for this project, people who are against this project, but I think we really need to get the town together and voice as a town, we got to speak with one voice, not all these, all the different voices. So that's something that I say to my neighbors. Let's see if we can find a way to have a Simsbury referendum. But I would appreciate your comments regarding all the tax credits.
Sure. Well, we are a private company, and an RFP was issued by 3 states in New England looking for more clean energy, mostly wind and solar. We responded to that RFP and were selected as one of the projects. And eventually, we negotiated contracts with the utilities in Massachusetts to buy all the power. So with respect to your particular electric rates, unless you live in Massachusetts, it's not particularly relevant to you because you're not buying any of the power. The utilities in Massachusetts are buying all the energy from this project. We are maybe I'm wrong, maybe you're a Massachusetts utility ratepayer, in which case that would be a relevant issue to you. We are a private company, so I'm not going to get into what level of tax credits we receive. Solar projects do receive federal investment tax credits. Every solar project in the country is eligible for that. Other types of energy resources qualify for tax credits and other type of incentives from states or federal governments. And this project will very likely also qualify. We will certainly attempt to qualify the project for tax credits, and we'll take advantage of every sort of opportunity we have to apply for those tax credits and receive them. We're confident we will, but we're a private company, and I'm not going to go any further into what the finances of the project are.
I'm Ginger Chen, live in 12 Saxton Brook Drive. So the proposed solar farm just behind our house. Although there's some wood area as buffer, but still quite close. So my question is concerned a little bit on the environmental side. So one thing is have some studies that the solar farm will raise the regional temperature or something? Do you have any idea how many degrees, how much degrees it will raise for such a big scale solar farm in this particular region? Particularly, there is one elementary school. It's a pretty big elementary school. It's close to your proposed area. So I have some concern on if the temperature will raise certain degrees, especially in close to summer weather or something. The other one is regarding to the sound. So there still have some, you say, substation to collect all the powers there. So I don't know how loud those places will produce, especially at midnight, at nighttime. I have concern if I will keep listening, hearing all those sound at nighttime. So that's my question.
Okay. Let me answer the first question for us. Basically, You can go on the internet and you'll see people who do claim that solar farms raise temperature. As a general statement, it's not a true statement. To the extent that you have temperature rises associated with man's involvement, it's global warming to the extent that one believes the science, which I happen to. And it's based on CO2 emissions and the precursors of ozone in the Northeast because we're non-attainment. So in essence, one should see, from the facility boundary out, virtually no change in temperature. I would suggest you will see no change in temperature, although I am the first to admit that I have read such things on the internet. But quite candidly, it's not founded in science. And with respect to your second question, which is about noise associated with some of the facilities out there, such as the inverters, and particularly in the evening hours, I'll ask Sue to answer that question.
So VHB is doing an acoustical analysis for the project. As Claude mentioned, there's some equipment associated with the project that does generate noise. These are inverters and transformers. There's 14 equipment pads spaced throughout the site. Generally, they're interior to the project. We made a lot of effort or took great care to keep them away from the property boundaries. So we're assessing the projected noise levels that would be generated by those pieces of equipment and comparing that to the state's standards. So the state of Connecticut has established criteria for the evaluation of noise, and they've established different emitter source classifications and then receptor classifications. So our project would be considered a Class C emitter. Your homes would be considered Class A receptors. There's a nighttime standard of 45 decibels, A-weighted decibels. And so our analysis shows that most of the project is going to be compliant with that, and where those levels are exceeded, which is a very small amount, we'll be mitigating that in accordance with the state's regulations. So yeah, the mitigation would consist of barriers that would be constructed around the equipment. Essentially, if you think about sound is a wave that travels through the atmosphere. You need to block the line of sight in order to block that sound from reaching a receptor. So we would be putting up right around the equipment some barriers like a fence type of thing that would be of a slightly greater height than the equipment itself. So about 10 feet, 10 to 12 feet.
My name is Mike Flamini. Live 3 Kilbourne Farms. I have a question and then a comment. The question is, concepts like megawatt hours don't really mean much to me. So can you please tell us how big is a panel and how many panels will be installed as part of this project?
Yeah, so the panels themselves, this particular model that we've used sort of generically in order to design the layout of this project, it generates 340 watts. And when you combine them all together, it adds up to a total. So with all the adjustments that we've been making, we don't have a final number of panels, and probably by the time that the facility is built with increasing efficiency of panels, it'll be an even lower number. The target that the project needs to meet based on the agreement with the utility companies and the states is 26.4 megawatts.
So you're not answering the question at all. Just like to know how many panels are in your proposal that will be submitted.
So we don't have the answer to that yet. We're still doing additional engineering analysis. We're doing our grading.
So let's do a red box bigger than, is it 100? Is it 100,000? Can you give us a direction? $98,000 panels? So
we will make the determination on the size of panel when we get further into the project. Panel technology is changing. Different vendors have different sizes. The technology is advancing rapidly. So I'm not going to give you a number because I don't know what the number is yet.
All right, well, I liked his number. I got that.
Okay.
So my comment is, someone raised at the start of the meeting that there's been a lot of misinformation, and I don't think any of us want to put out facts that aren't true. In return, I would appreciate if you would stop what I think is a dangerous narrative of creating this notion of our choice is between your project and Amazon, or your project in an office building, or even your project in residential homes. The fact is, there's only one choice on the table. And we as citizens can't make that choice because of the way the rules have been written. When and if this project doesn't happen, and something else goes to replace the farmland, then we'll hold our elected officials accountable for doing what we as the citizens think is the right thing to do for our neighborhood. So please stop the narrative in promulgating this that there's multiple choices. There's not.
So I will respond to that one. We did not write the rules. We did not write the state citing regulations. We did.
Sir, please let narrative. Sir, so that we can keep this civil, please let them answer your.
So we didn't write any of the rules that are applicable here. We're following the rules, and I think we've done a good job at going beyond what the rules require us to do. We have provided you with the information on how this land is zoned, and that zoning is a fact. You can make your own determination on whether you think any of that will ever come to pass, but I don't think that we have been dishonest in pointing that out. I do think many people hope that the land will simply stay the way it is forever, and I do think it's important to counter that with the fact that it is zoned in a way that would allow a multiplicity of uses here. Could be residential on some parcels, could be industrial.
First, I have a mundane question. The first slide said 26.4 megawatt. You probably meant megawatt hour?
I'm sorry, no, 26.4 is megawatts of capacity. That's the full capacity of the panels. Those panels will produce megawatt hours over time. The number of megawatt hours is much larger than that. It's 40+ thousand megawatt hours a year.
So how come that's only 5,000 homes?
I'm sorry, sir, what was the question?
How come it's only supplied to 500 homes?
About 5,000 homes. So
Based on this, it should be much more unless you're talking about kilowatt hours rather than kilowatts.
So,
but this
26.4 megawatts of capacity, not megawatt hours, megawatts of capacity. Over the course of one full year, we expect the project to produce over 40,000 megawatt hours. That is equivalent to what about 5,000 homes will use over the course of a year.
Okay, let's go on this. The other question, you may know that there were other considerations for the land several years ago to build homes on them. And one of the biggest problems that we encountered at the time was the remediation of the surface of the soil because of contamination from agricultural chemicals. Now, you said you are going to do just a little bit of grading. This is where all these chemicals reside, is in this a little bit of grading that you need to do, and we are going to encounter exactly the same, issues that we encountered 10 years ago, and we went through a lot of, discussion in the town and legal discussion about this, and there's no way to get this land worked in any shape or form without getting all these chemicals into the air. The other thing is, you're talking all the time about industrial, and I really applaud this gentleman that spoke before me. You know when the last industrial endeavor moved into Simsbury? Before we all came here, Ensign Bickford. Ensign Bickford will nowhere will consider industrial, heavy industrial. So you keep throwing the words like, you know, a steel mill is coming into the middle of Simsbury. There's nothing like this happened in Simsbury in the 40 years that I'm here, and there's some people that happen to be longer than this. And at best, you know, we may get another gas station that will fix cars.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that there was a question, but I guess I can speak to what the plans are for how we're going to address the grading. Right now, you know, the lots are actively farmed, and the large lot just on the north side of Hoskins Road, just in the last few weeks, has been essentially, the whole surface has been turned over and leveled. The last farming event, they raised hills in between, so it was pretty uneven, so they've leveled that all out. So I'm raising that as an example of the kinds of practices that are happening there under agriculture now. So there's a lot of earth moving. It's not large volumes of earth moving from here to there, but the types of activities that are ongoing are turning over the soil, the surface of the soil, and generating dust. So anyway, under our project proposal, when the site is developed, our portion of the site we're proposing to build on is about 156 acres. 90% of that, we're just going to go out and build the project right on it. We don't need to do any grading, so we don't even need to smooth that out, like what's happening now. The other 10%, we need to do some minor grading in order to smooth out those areas so that we won't have runoff problems. We're obligated to manage runoff on the site in such a way that it doesn't leave the site in an erosive manner and cause a problem on someone else's property or degrade the environment. In terms of dust that might be generated from that type of activity, there are air regulations that require the control of fugitive dust from our site, just like any other construction site. Techniques that you use to address that or to minimize fugitive dust would be applying water. So you might see on different construction sites there's water trucks driving around spraying water. We'll be employing that type of technique. Also, some construction sites use calcium chloride, which is an approved method. It's approved by the EPA. Basically, it binds the surface of the soil and keeps the dust from flying away. I don't think that we'll be using that method, but it is an approved method. So that's how we're controlling that. In terms of soil that might get washed off the site, maybe during a rain event or that sort of thing, we're again obligated under state regulations to control that on the site. So our project site plans have a very robust soil erosion and sediment control plan that includes a number of different sort of structural and non-structural best management practices to maintain construction phase runoff and disturbed soils on the site. So it's, again, our obligation under the regulations of the state of Connecticut to do that.
So the gentleman on my right has a question. He's been standing here shadowing me.
Yeah, we've had a lot of questions about statements about what the land has been used for, but I was wondering if I were to come back once the project is finished and the solar panels are no longer being used, how will this project have affected the usability of the land, and what might you plan to do with the land when you are done using it?
Talk about usability, agricultural value.
Sure. So building on what I just described about the grading and how little of the site we're actually needing to grade, the real reason why we're doing that, or one of the reasons, there's a couple of reasons. Obviously, the less earthwork we have to do, the less money that is being spent on that type of a site preparation. But also, one of the basic premises for our design effort for this project was to retain the site in a condition where it could be returned to agriculture at the end of the project. So, it isn't, we're not obligated to do that under the state's current laws. A developer could come in and strip off the topsoil and sell it, and then build their whatever subdivision, bring in some topsoil from somewhere else and plant grass. We're not doing that. We don't want to do that. We want to keep the soil that's there so that the site could be suitable for agriculture in the future.
So I'm going to pass the mic to this gentleman, and then I'm going to get this lady over here.
Thank you. Robert Kalishman, Simsbury. I don't object to what you're doing. However, I do object to the method that's being used by both you and my representatives from the town that represent me in the state and also represent me in the town of Simsbury. And this is the question, or leading to the question, I like to maintain. I ran as representative as a unrelated candidate, an unaffiliated candidate for representative from the town of Simsbury. I ran on 2 occasions. My opponents were Linda Schofield, who testified here, and my other opponent was John Hampton. Now, during these debates, as we debated, and we debated many times with Ms. Schofield and a few times with Mr. Hampton, at no time, and I refute if anybody tells me otherwise, and I challenge them to tell me otherwise, was this item ever brought up that there was a law being presented that would send the solar panels and people that wanted to go into that power business, if they were to do that, that at least the people of the Simsbury should have had an idea whether it was coming or it wasn't going. It was never brought up. So in my many comments to the board in these hearings, I mentioned that, tongue-in-cheek, it's an inside job. And the thing is this, we've had a situation where we had solar people come to town. They wanted to put these panels at the dump. It was brought up in front of the Board of Selectmen and the Zoning Board. And at the time, the question arose that there was an objection from the Simsbury Airport people that the reflection from the panels was going to hinder the pilots and lives would be in danger. So we went ahead with it, and the town said, well, we're going to take care of it, and they said, we're going to take it. So finally they said, okay, we're going to put the panels at the dump, and then they couldn't decide how the dump became a dump, so then they decided that they would put it somewhere elsewhere. And that's the situation we have. So I don't object to what you're doing. What I do object to is the method that's being used. And you mean to tell me if you're a governor or you're a representative or a senator from Connecticut and you represent Simsbury that you don't know that this bill is going to go through and you're going to be asked to vote on it? And my question to you, before you apply for your license, have you ever had any communications with either the representative or the senator from Simsbury? Or have you ever communications with anybody in the federal government? Because I just have to ask the question. I don't see educated fellas like you are going into this project without the knowledge that we all know of the
subsidies and everything that's coming down the pike from the federal government. And my last question, and thank you for your indulgence, my last question is, you're giving us the wrong impression, because according to Ms. Schofield, this solar thing, we have a new president, and he's bringing in clean coal, he's going to bring in other methods, and eventually this solar thing can be a thing of the past. You may laugh, but a lot of people laughed when they mentioned about the scrubbers and everything about the coal. So thank you for indulging me, and I appreciate if you answer my question.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The one thing I won't get into here is national politics or local politics, but I will. We've not met with any of your state representatives or senators, so I think that was your specific question. Again, I will defer on national politics.
We're going to try and move things along a little quicker. She's promised to be short. So.
I kind of have a question and a comment. I'm Jennifer Rowley. I live at 80 County Road. And it's been brought up but never really addressed is what is the impact of home values near these sites? And I've heard the comparisons, with wind farms and other things like this, but I'm wondering why there's no data out there. And one of the reasons I'm wondering if there's no data out there is because typically these large farms are not put in residential areas. And so what I'm wondering is how much money are we losing in home equity potentially? I don't know if it would or not, but are we losing out of our pockets with having no immediate benefit to us? So in my view, if I end up losing home equity, am I writing you guys a check for 30 grand for your project and I lost that money? So I don't know if you have any information about home values around solar farms. I have not been able to find anything online. Everything I have seen defers to wind, but I don't think that's an apples comparison. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There's a resource that we can send you to. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory addresses this issue. It's a national federal laboratory that looks at energy issues. They do have on their website some information about solar projects and impact on property values. Their conclusion is that solar projects do not impact property values, but I can provide you with that website, and you can read the information for yourself.
Okay. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Thanks. Given the size of the project and the fact that you folks haven't done this before, and whether we agree there's clean coal or we know there's a lot of energy, we know there's a large natural gas supply, and that we're actually exporting energy for the first time in our country. And so one of the things first time in a long time, one of the things I'm wondering is, what happens if this business proposition doesn't work out? Somewhere down the road, 10 years from now, what if you're not making the money you're hoping you're making? Do you walk away from the project and are we stuck with a whole bunch of solar panels and no one responsible for them?
Yeah, a good question. I think Mr. Hoffman addressed this a bit. I'll paraphrase what Mr. Hoffman said earlier. As part of the state's siting council process, we have to provide them with our decommissioning plan, and we also have to give them financial assurance that the project can be decommissioned. And the reason you do that is so, for that very reason, that should something happen and we're no longer here operating the project, there is sufficient financial resources to decommission it. And decommissioning it means you pull up all the equipment and cart it away. So that's part of the siting council process, and when we submit our petition, you'll see that information.
Does the funding go in some kind of, where do those funds sit?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Hoffman on that.
Those funds sit wherever the siting council tells us they're supposed to sit. There's a number of ways you can do it, through a letter of credit, through a performance bond. It's like any other construction guarantee. You could even set aside cash in a lockbox, but the point is that it has to be there and available, and the siting council has to approve the methodology. There's a couple of different ways, and before the project is allowed to begin construction, that has to be fully vetted by the siting council.
Thank you. Two questions. One, would you consider waiting until the passing of R943A before you submit your proposal? And two, if you can explain just a little bit more about the recent article about how Connecticut rejected the proposal. I don't know if that's the correct wording, but if you can just explain what that means.
So, as I said earlier, our plan is to submit our petition next week. We have delayed our submission for some time now in order to go through the multiple public meetings that we've had. I did. Well, I thought I answered that. We're going to submit it next week, so no. Your second question was about. I'm sorry. Remind me.
Well, Connecticut said that they rejected the proposal.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You haven't proposed anything yet, so I don't know what they rejected.
Yeah. So this goes back to the procurement that happened. This is the it was called the Tri-State Clean Energy RFP, and what that means is that Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, the states and their utilities, got together and issued an RFP asking for clean energy, wind and solar for the most part. Lots of proposals were submitted. We were one of the proposals that was submitted, and then through some process that I'm not quite familiar with, the three states and all the utilities decided which projects they wanted to pick and which they didn't want to pick. Different utilities in the different states picked different projects. Connecticut, the state of Connecticut and its utilities did not pick this project. They did pick some projects in other states and some projects in Connecticut, I believe. Our project was selected by the utilities in Massachusetts. Why one utility picked one project versus another is not something I can answer. I don't know.
Very quickly.
So is that, I don't understand that process. Are there multiple projects that are going to get picked, or are they down selecting to a certain number?
No, they've already been, they've all already been picked.
And then it's just like by majority vote, probably, or something?
No, so what happens is although the three states came together to ask for projects, the decisions were up to the individual utilities. I don't think they voted. So all of the proposals went into one process. All of the utilities looked at all of the proposals, and then the utilities in each state picked which ones they wanted. They weren't voting. They just selected the ones they wanted. Different utilities picked different projects, and I don't know, the reasons for that. But it was the utilities' decisions. Massachusetts picked our project to buy the power. To buy the power, Massachusetts will buy the power from the project, correct?
Okay, we have a question back here.
Hi, I actually have two very specific questions. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us tonight and your previous meetings. My name is Jessica Parise. I live on North Saddle Ridge, so not near the project. However, I do have a student at Squadron Line. My first question is, following up on the woman who just spoke before me, recognizing you intend to submit next week before the July 1 deadline, my question is, to alleviate the concern of the citizens here, and clearly the legislature who's pushed this bill through very quickly, will you voluntarily agree to submit to 943, or if not, agree not to oppose any efforts by the town or others to find a way to make that bill applicable to you? And my second question is, in light of Deepwater's inexperience in actually building and maintaining a solar farm, I recognize you seem to be very involved in wind efforts, but with respect to solar farms, can you please identify specific individuals that you've hired, presumably you have, who've done this before, and point us to specific sites that they have worked on that are actually ongoing concerns?
Okay. The first question was about the new piece of legislation. The short answer is no. We're going to file next week. Rules were in place when we started this project. We're following those rules that have been in place for a very long time now, and rules that will be in place next week. We're going to submit our petition to the Siting Council, and we aren't going to delay that. We've already delayed long enough. Yeah. I think we're going to proceed with the law as it exists today.
And then the second question, the specific individuals and specific sites.
Yes. So I think I answered part of this before. We are also owned by a parent organization that has built and owns a number of solar projects. I think we can provide you with a list, and you can go and see them if you like. We will select a construction firm to build this project. There are a handful of construction companies that build solar projects in this region. We will use one that has built many different solar projects in the area. We have not made that selection yet, though.
What's the name of the parent company?
The name is D.E. Shaw. They are our principal owner. D.E. Shaw, S-H-A-W. They are our principal owner.
Okay, we have a question from this gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is Raymond Hanley. I'm from Westcott Road. I think you made a good...
We're all still here. We're going to answer your questions.
Okay. I think you made a good illustration early on about my opinion of the project, in that I think, in view of the fact that things don't stay the same, that this has a very low impact comparatively to any of the other options that could be used on this land. A lot of people, and we have a very strong environmental consciousness in this town. We have done a very good job of protecting a lot of land. We have a very strong land trust and a good interaction with the town in that regard. Having said that, I do agree that I'm in favor of this project based on the lesser of two evils kind of approach. So my specific question to you is, to help people who want to keep things the same, are you aware of any offers by any specific land trusts or any conservation organizations or any neighbors groups or any residents groups or any environmental corporations to buy this land and protect it?
No. No, the land is for sale, and that's how we came in contact with the seller.
Okay, we're going to give equal time to the right-hand side of the room here.
Real quickly, you had said during decommissioning the plan, or after 20, 25 years, it would go to an e-waste. Can you explain what that is? And my real question is anything in the panel or anything that you use, is there anything toxic in it?
Okay, let me take a crack at that. By e-waste, I was referring to electronic waste. Currently, virtually every state in the union has electronic mandatory recycling, or in the alternative, they have a landfill ban on the disposal of electronic devices. Computers, televisions, old monitors, etc., have different amounts of metals and other toxic compounds in them. So therefore, the landfill ban directs that they go to facilities where they will be recycled, disassembled, source separated, sent in smelters, metal separated, those sorts of things. A number of the states have picked up panels and put them in their electronic recycling program. Panels are still relatively new, that a lot of states have not caught up to that. The New England states have been talking about it now for about a year, and I've actually had a number of conversations, specifically with some of the directors of regulatory agencies. And through the Northeast, it's the quasi-governmental organization, which is the Association of Solid Waste Territorial Managers. They're considering having commensurate laws that will reciprocate across state lines to require that panels be handled as e-waste. So in the panels, there's metals in the panel. They're sealed. They're not going to leach into the land, but at the end of the life cycle, you don't want a panel in a landfill to be crushed, because therefore, in a landfill environment, you raise the potentiality of releasing those metals, just as you would from computer screens and TV screens. So the life cycle of this facility is in the range of 20 to 25 years. And I would be shocked and amazed if within the next few years, almost every state had panels in the e-waste program. But a panel sitting inert is basically a square frame of aluminum, and it's a sealed glass-type material, so that the metals that I'm discussing are on the inside of it, just as a lot of the metals in a computer screen are on the inside of the cathode tube.
And if it breaks, any concern to people? I'm just asking.
No, because when they break, what will happen is you're not going to have the release of it, because it's, basically it's a safety type glass. And if you left it for enormous amounts of time, you may have a leaching issue. But the reality is you're going to see your voltage drop, and you're not going to want a broken thing, so you're going to go out and replace it in a timely manner, because your system will monitor it, and you'll see a voltage drop.
Okay, moving on to, ma'am, did you have a question?
E. Cascali, West Simsbury. Thank you for all the information tonight. I think after tonight, the criticism of no transparency can't really hold too much anymore. I like the preservation that's going to be happening with your project. I also want to say that having solar panels built in my backyard, I think a company that has built 5 big wind turbines off the coast will probably handle putting up a simpler project of solar panels. And today's paper, the Hartford Courant, said that Connecticut rejected this project because the electricity was going to be too expensive. Is that true? Is that the reason why they rejected
Well,
it?
I don't know why they rejected. They don't give you the reasons. I can tell you that utilities in Massachusetts did not agree. So
Yeah, it was in the Hartford Courant today that's why they rejected it.
yeah, I don't know.
Okay, coming down the center aisle. Sir, you've already had a turn. I got to give other people their first turn first. That's only fair.
Hi, my name is Doris Roth. I live on Musket Trail. And I just have to get back to the myth issue, because just in my lifetime, there have been too many myths that have turned out to be nightmares. And I did search on the internet to try and find some studies about what happens when there's this large number of panels around. I couldn't find anything about a public school, an elementary school, and I couldn't find anything that listed it, in a population where there are a lot of houses abutting the fields. So I don't know if there aren't any. You mentioned that maybe there was one in Scandinavia, but if you could, address that. And also, so I would want to make sure that it isn't something like, we used to have asbestos tiles all over the place, and we found out that those were hazardous. And we used to x-ray our feet to make sure our shoes fit, and there are all kinds of things that we used to do that we found out were very dangerous, and people died. And so I would really want assurances that there's been some significant investigation into close proximity of people living and an elementary school to the large number of panels that you're putting in. So that's one question. And then another question, what would happen if some kids got into the fields and, were out one night and something, and they thought it would be fun to go and investigate? Is there a danger to that, or what might happen? What's the worst case scenario?
Let me, 2 separate questions. The first one, as I understand it, I think you're referring to electromagnetic force and some of the statements that were made on that earlier this evening. And that was the Scandinavian studies that I was referring to. Those studies are, I said 20, they're probably closer to 30 years old. I just happen to be getting older all the time. On the heels of that, that raised anomalies, that there's the possibility of that with elevated cancer risk. Well, those were not peer-reviewed studies, and they were just raising the question. On the heels of that, basically in the last 30 years, there's been a lot of study that's been done, mostly where you really do have electromagnetic forces associated with high-voltage transmission lines, not low-voltage facilities. And I guess the best comprehensive review of the literature that I've seen is the Center for Disease Control. It's not industry, it's not anything. It's the United States government, and they're the people that look at the Zika viruses and whatever. They actually do have EMF questions and answers on their website. They actually funded a number of studies that were peer-reviewed, and in essence came up with no significant elevated risk associated with it. And that being said with the left hand, the point that I raised with the right hand was, if somehow you believe that the science is unknown, or that there's no conclusion, or you want to prevent the risk, then what do? Is bury the cable. So whichever side you come down on that issue up front, the cables are going to be buried at this facility. So in essence, to the extent that one says it's a risk, the remedy is to bury the cables, and that's what the design is calling for. So there'll be no overhead transmission lines. So in essence, it's a harm not to be prevented because the remedy's in place if you think it's a harm, which I personally don't.
What about if it's got in there?
Basically, there are electrical power transmission stations all over the place. There are substations all around this town that have significantly greater voltage than this facility. And as this facility, will have, is you have a chain link fence. So the risk at this facility is, I guess, no different than other facilities. You prevent it by having a plan. You inspect your facility routinely, obviously. And you just basically have a fence as a barrier that's marked. This is an electrical generating station. There's high voltages, no trespassing, authorized personnel only.
Okay, this gentleman has a question over here.
Two short ones, because you need short questions now. With the contamination in the soil, what are the chances this could actually be considered a brownfield application for solar? And the second question is just more of personal curiosity. When you file your D&D plan, and I know you said that you'd be astonished if panels weren't e-waste by the time the project decommissions. In your D&D plan, do you plan to provide for that as e-waste?
Just on the issue of contamination, we did do a phase 1 environmental site assessment, and we wouldn't be purchasing this property if we knew that there was contamination on the site. We came up with, we didn't see that risk. So that's where we're at with that. And in terms of the decommissioning plan, we wouldn't presume to prescribe what sort of waste stream the panels would need to go into. We would say that they would be disposed in accordance with the laws applicable at the time.
Sir, you in the front have a question?
John Martell, I live at 10 County Road. The solar farm would be on the east of my property and on the north of my property. I live right above the hill where Hoskins and County split. She answered one of my questions, and that is, I guess you're purchasing this land, right?
Correct.
That is yes, we have an option to purchase it.
Okay, and in 25 years you own the land. What would you do with it?
I don't know, sir.
One more question.
I don't know what we're going to do with the land in 25 years from now. I think we don't know whether solar energy is something that we'll be able to sell in 25 years, as this gentleman feels quite confident that it's going to go away. We don't know what the local zoning regs will be. We have no plans today for anything other than developing this solar farm and using it for its useful life.
Yeah, but when you say it'll revert to agricultural land, you're going to grow tomatoes, or?
I don't anticipate that, sir. I think what our point is, we want to build the project in a way that we retain the agricultural value of the soil so that it could be farmed again.
Okay. I have one more question. Are you going to buy American?
Yeah, unfortunately, to the extent the equipment is available, yeah, we will. Well, that's not an easy one to answer, sir. There are a lot of different pieces of equipment that come from different places.
Al DeGusto from 35 Northgate. I'm very much in favor of clean energy and truly appreciate the fact that you folks are making an attempt to try and bridge the gap. I just have two questions. One, what is the economic value to Simsbury and its residents? And then secondly, I know that Massachusetts has purchased all of your power. Is there any opportunity for us to participate in some form of net metering?
The answer to the second one is no, because we've contracted all of the energy to those utilities. That was the point of that RFP. The utilities want to buy all the energy from the projects that they select. So we will have a long-term contract with those utilities by which we produce the energy, and they pay us. They buy all that energy. So the energy is spoken for. Your first question was around the economic value to Simsbury. I think principally that will be the tax revenue. As I said earlier, my understanding is that the property, all 5 parcels in total, pay about $25,000 a year in taxes. We would anticipate paying taxes for this facility by a factor of 10 or more. And so that is something that we'll work out as we work with an assessor on how to value the facility under the local rules. But we will be certainly a very significant taxpayer.
Okay. This gentleman has a question. Don't you?
I did. Most of it was answered, but it was kind of piggybacking on the last question, actually. You put up a lot of slides today, and one of them was the benefits of Simsbury, which, with all due respect, was probably one of your weaker slides of trying to prove it was a benefit to Simsbury, just the tax money, but not that much tax money. I guess I'm just curious on top of that, in terms of you as a company, as a private corporation, do you consider yourself sort of a private corporate citizen of Simsbury, and will you provide charitable money to the town for certain events like other companies do in the town? And if there's a possible yes in that, can you give specific examples of what you've done in other towns or states?
Sure. I think the short answer to that is yes. I mean, we want to be a good neighbor here. We want to be a long-time part of this community. We understand that this will be a significant project that will be here for a long time, and we'll have many neighbors, and we'll want to participate in this community like other businesses do. I don't have any particular plans or ideas, and I think if we proceed with the project, that's conversation we'll have with the community. There are some benefits that we would like to provide, like walking trails through the facility. I know that's important to some folks. I think the best experience for us is how we participate in the community on Block Island, where we built the first offshore wind farm, where we very regularly participate in most of the big charitable events and support a number of charities on that island on a regular basis. So I think we would anticipate doing something similar here in Simsbury, whether it's with the school system or other local charities. I'm open to ideas.
And this gentleman next to me has a question as well.
Thank you. This is the efficient part of the night right here. Questions next to each other. So just for some people said some things that were just on the basic knowledge of solar. I work in the industry. I do much smaller projects, residential and commercial. But just for everyone who's still here, it's just using the metric system. So someone up there mentioned a 340-watt panel. 1,000 watts is a kilowatt. 1,000 kilowatts is a megawatt. So it's really simple math to figure out. As someone asked, how many panels would it be? It wouldn't be as high as 98,000 though, because I did the math. So anyway, I think that it would be helpful if all of us in a conceptually start to think about things like this a little bit beyond, the not in my backyard topic. People are going to fall, you guys are going to feel, we're all going to feel however we feel about the actual location of the project. But I would really encourage all of us to challenge ourselves to try to think a little bit wider on all of this, because somebody here who already left, whose opinion was that solar may not be around. I mean, it's hard not to laugh at that. I mean, that's like really not being plugged in at all with what's happening in the world. A woman over there said we're way behind as a state, and that is accurate. If even a casual glance at what's going on around the world, it's a global movement that no one politician or agenda is going to stop. Doesn't matter how Trump feels about it. Solar and wind is here to stay. It's absolutely a part of our future. And if the project does come and lands in Simsbury and it ends up giving some kind of economic benefit for Massachusetts residents, is that really something to be upset about? I mean, is that really where we want to be? We want to be that narrow in our scope about this? I mean, it could go the other way. If Massachusetts does a project that benefits us, I'm sure we'd be happy about that, right? So let's not be hypocritical, and let's try to see the big picture and support projects like this, whether or not it happens at the tobacco fields. That's, again, we all feel how we feel about it, but projects like this need to happen if we want to leave our kids and grandkids a sustainable future. Thanks.
I'm coming. I'm just slow. You don't get to be my size and be quick. Yes, ma'am. I'm coming to you.
I just want to go first because I'm probably one of the more senior members here. I grew up in this town. We had 30 acres, and I appreciated all the stuff you've brought forward here. However, Simsbury is very unique. There's only one Simsbury in the United States. I don't know if many people know that, but our 06070 is very particular. And we're all very particular here. And I would think that if you were building a nice project for Simsbury, you would go to Bill McClay and you would look at the new net zero, and you would be giving us something special for Simsbury. I love solar. I've been really pushing solar, but there's a lot of efficiency that is not in any of the buildings that we have around here going up right now, and it really, really upsets me. So I would like to see you come back to us with a proposal that would be innovative and interesting for Simsbury, using net zero energy, and show us how you can use solar by houses, or you can have passive solar. Our energy company does not support that at all. They just want to put in meters. Eversource, our energy company right now, has a monopoly going because they have gas, they have electric, and they've acquired our aquarium water. With those three things going, they can sell all the meters they want. They don't want to buy your electricity, they don't want to buy anybody's solar electricity. We have to start doing it ourselves, one house at a time. So if anyone wants to look at the book, Bill McClay or Armory Lovins, everyone knows that, Reinventing Fire, we can each do it in our own households. We don't need a solar farm. We really don't. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here for so long tonight. My name is Holly Henderson. I grew up in this town. I'm at 90 Laura Lane, near where this is going in, but I do not abut any of the property. A couple of follow-up points or questions. One, you said that you've got the contract with Massachusetts. Is that for the duration of the life of the farm? Is it a 20-year contract?
It is a 20-year contract with several options to extend.
Okay.
That's my recollection, yeah.
I think that you have a number of lessons learned here in your meetings that you've had with different residents. But one I think that you've really missed is if you're going to try this in another town, that you need to look at considering the town that you're going to as a partner from the beginning, and look at net metering, and look, if you came here and said, yes, we're going to be a tax base substitution for the loss of the Hartford here, all right, that's one option. But it stops there, just the taxes that you're paying. If you were to come in and say, we will partner with the town and we will provide some of the electricity that we are supplying, the wattage we're supplying, is going to come back to the town to support our schools and our town buildings, you might have had a little more headway with some of the people involved in this room tonight. So keep that in mind for... I have no idea on what it involves from an engineering perspective, and I'm not going to pretend to, but I know it's been done in other towns. I know there are towns in western New York that have built their own solar farms and supply their energy to their town residents. So it's possible. You should figure it out for the next time you attack this with another town. That's all I have. Thank you for being here.
Okay, I've had several people while I've been walking by ask to see the renderings. And Gordon has put a lot of time and effort into those. We will stay as long as y'all want to. We're committed to do that. But I think that we might want to at least see what Gordon has put together.
So I think we're going to put the renderings right over here.
So feel free to come on up. If you have questions, you can come ask us individually. We're happy to answer.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.